The BC government is big on taxes and apparently is also big on banning short-term rentals. So I figured, why should I try to answer this question for my clients when I've got two heavy hitters from the local market that can share their thoughts? So Steve, Ryan, thanks for joining today.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thanks for
having me.
having us.
So first of all, can you just explain a bit about what these new restrictions mean for British Columbians and how are these going to affect property owners and real estate investors?
Steve, do you want to
You,
go first?
you go for it.
I go first. Essentially, provincial government's coming in with some new rules here regarding the short-term rental accommodations, and these will be taking effect next year in May. And this is basically giving a blanket rule for the entire province, and it's kind of overlaid on top of the municipal bylaws that may or may not already exist. And the event basically created saying that anything under 90 days is considered short term, and it has stipulations such as principal residence. It needs to be principal residence. If you're going to be doing it, it needs to be a lane home basement suite. Basically, you need to live on the house, on the property if you're going to do short term. Otherwise, if you're renting, otherwise it needs to be 90 days minimum. And the fines have gone up as well. And Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, or
Yeah, I think there's one thing just to clarify, which is like I look at like City of Vancouver, which is where I predominantly operate, and the current Airbnb regulations technically supersede the BC government's framework, and the City of Vancouver's Airbnb regulations already are more strict than the BC government. So I think really what this does is it gives municipalities a framework and a process to follow. And it also gives municipalities, apparently, it's going to give them more teeth or levels of enforcement because the BC government is actually going to help with policing and creating that database so they can actually have something to use and actually enforce more of these regulations.
Mm-hmm. And then one more thing we should add is that there are exemptions. There are any resort municipalities. So in Topino, Whistler, this wouldn't apply. You can continue to do short term. And I think communities under 10,000 people, Steve, for the majority are exempted as well. So there's
Yes.
some pockets which you can continue without freely doing Airbnb. So these pockets you can keep doing what you're doing if you're doing short term.
So like areas or cities are going to be most affected then by this? I'm guessing just like Vancouver or what?
It's tough to say because it's like Steve was
Kelowna?
saying, this Kelowna maybe because there's a lot of tourism going up there. I think thinking about the type of people, like Vancouver has the rules that exist already for the short-term rentals. You have to be registered. There's already a bit of a 30-day kind of barrier. But what's interesting with this is now they've changed the definition of short-term from 30 to 90 days. And the difference between a 30-day stay and a 90-day stay, the kind of person that's staying there does fair amount. So I think what might change or cities that might get hurt is, I mean, like Vancouver, we get people coming in for perhaps wanting to stay for a month to 3 months. That kind of client is not going to be able to have options unless they want to book a hotel. They don't have a kitchen in a hotel and it's very expensive. There's going to be much less options for them now with some of these Airbnbs coming off the market. So I think that consumer could get impacted, maybe traveling doctors or patients needing surgery in town. That will be a margin portion of the market which could feel that. Steve, what you
You've heard
think?
Victoria as well in terms of,
Mhm.
so it's interesting. There's already discussions around capital and free markets always try to find ways around rules and regulations. And so I think what I'm hearing is, like example, like nurses and stuff that are or doctors that are visiting the island, Victoria, for example, to obviously help with their overloaded healthcare system. It has sometimes been relying on short-term rentals for accommodation. And so what I'm now hearing is saying, well, can a corporation sign longer term lease and then basically sublet or Airbnb or do nightly rentals to the people coming in that
Mhm.
accommodation. So I think that it's hard to say as of right now in terms of the total impacts. All we can do is speculate. I still think it's going to be difficult to police and really enforce. I think they're obviously ramping up the fines and stuff, and I think they're really just trying to scare people and prevent people from looking and doing Airbnbs.
Because I guess there was probably people just buying property for the whole sole purpose of Airbnb it to make profit, and in a housing crisis, that's it's no bueno. So,
Go ahead.
so when it comes to like prices of property, like what segments of the market do you think are going to be hit by this? Obviously, we've got other factors right now with the rates where they are, but this specifically, where are people doing a lot of these Airbnb properties? And will there be properties for sale because of this?
Right now, I think I'd say the prices, it could affect, example, it doesn't have to be all bad. Like, it might be some markets that are positively affected by this. I was just thinking like Whistler, for example, probably looks even more desirable now if you want to do short term because it doesn't have these restrictions. Or Tofino or these resort communities could maybe see even a benefit in pricing. In terms of rental rates, I was talking to my property manager, and he thinks this is going to, a lot of his clients are converting maybe their Airbnbs or their 30 to 30 day. I don't even know what you call it 30 days. It's short term. It's like a quasi short term. They're converting them to long term now. And like that he does think that this might bring down rental rates to some degree. But it's throwing a small piece of water on a big fire. This is going to maybe help things a little bit in terms of rental rates. But again, there's obviously still a lot to be done with more rental supply and all that too. So we might see some reduction in rental rates. I don't know, you, Steve, you let me know what you think. I don't think prices will come down a lot as a result of this. I don't know if it's going to have a huge change in the market with inventory coming on because of that, but maybe if interest rates continue going up or stay where they are for a long time, people might feel the pinch and need to sell off their asset. But I don't know if they'll have a huge impact on prices. But here's to hear what Steve actually thinks too.
I think that the broader market is not going to see any impact from Airbnb on pricing. Obviously, I think interest rates are going to do all the price corrections here over the next several months, 6 months, 8 months, whatever you want to call it. But I think where you're going to see the impact is on like individual buildings. So I look like downtown Vancouver, for example. I don't know, there's a handful of buildings that actually allow Airbnb or turn a blind eye to Airbnb, and the values in those buildings have obviously gone up because investors have specifically targeted them. And as these regulations come into play and are more forced, I think that you're going to see values are going to be hit probably in those buildings. But in terms of like the broader market, I ultimately think Airbnb is a drop in the bucket. I know that a lot of people out there don't like it and think it's really exacerbating a housing crisis. Totally fair. But I do think in the grand scheme of things, I do think it's a drop in the bucket. And so even for rentals, I've had a lot of conversations with people that are single family homeowners that putting their basement suite on Airbnb or their laneway house. Like a lot of these people aren't going to convert them to long-term rentals. They were doing it because they don't want long-term tenants. They want the freedom and the flexibility of be able to use the space and just rent it out periodically when they want to. And so I don't know. I personally don't think it's going to make any difference on the actual rental market.
Fair. And so I believe principal residence, you could still Airbnb. That's okay. It's just secondary properties you can't. Is that right?
Correct.
There is a clarification on that though. So the BC government says you can Airbnb your basement suite or you can Airbnb your laneway house. However, the city of Vancouver's regulations are technically they're stronger than the BC government, and the city of Vancouver's technical regulations say no Airbnb of your basement suite and no Airbnb of your laneway house.
Oh wow.
So again, it's been incredibly difficult to non-existing on the enforcement side. But again, someone's not allowed to Airbnb their basement is a bit of a head scratcher because they say, well, it has to be your primary residence. I would argue in many cases, your basement suite kind of is part of your primary residence. So it's a really gray area. And this is what I'm saying. It's going to be hard to really enforce. And there's still a lot of gray.
But you have an unauthorized basement suite, you're allowed to rent it because it doesn't technically exist.
Exactly. So I've heard of stories of people decommissioning their legal suites and making them like it's just I don't know. It's really complicated and it's still clear as mud.
So what advice would you guys give to property owners or investors who are looking to adapt to the regulations? So maybe they already purchased properties with the intent to Airbnb or they're Airbnb currently. Like, how much runway do they have before they're going to get in trouble? What's like the green, the gray, and the red, other than converting it to a long-term rental?
Yeah, I guess it's Airbnb has always been something that I've cautioned with. I haven't really there's always been a chance that government can step in or change, or if it wasn't the government, maybe the strata could have come in and said we want 90-day rentals plus or 6 months. So there was always a chance that it was a bit of a precarious situation to have to rely on Airbnb to make your mortgage payments. So fortunately, I haven't. A lot of my clients are a good chunk of them are not. It's a minority of people doing Airbnb, but people that maybe want to do something a little bit more in a niche market or maybe boost their cash flow, I think the furnished rentals are still a great place to be in. I would also advise on buying a studio, one bed. These are generally homes that are more conducive, people that are coming in and leaving on their own. You do want turnover, funny at this market, because you don't think a vacancy is a bad thing, but in Vancouver, such a hot rental market, turnover is gold. So you want a studio, you want a one bed, you don't really necessarily want a 3-bedroom condo, because then people are probably going to want to move in and stay for long term, right? So I would probably advise clients to buy just maybe smaller units, furnish them, and worst case, you do a 3-month rental, 6-month term. There's still a market for people coming in for midterms. So if they don't want to do long term, do midterm instead.
I've never had any clients specifically that we've worked with that have done Airbnb. It's not that we haven't had requests. It's just I've always really tried to steer people away from it because, like I said, the city before the BC government came out with these, the city of Vancouver's regulations were more strict, and there's a whole bunch of people that are operating Airbnbs illegally. And I've always been a believer that it's only a matter of time until they're caught or the government's asking them for more taxes or whatever. Because if you think about it, I think that one of the biggest drivers of the Airbnb phenomenon is people have been investors specifically going out and buying bedroom units to rent on Airbnb and then pretending or claiming that it's their primary residence so they qualify. But in reality, it's not their primary residence, and again, you're kind of cheating the system. And so my thing is like, why fight an uphill battle? Why do you want to get in a fighting match with the government? Just do what they want you to do and abide by the regulations. And I think real estate's like a long-term wealth play. So that's kind of always been my view on the Airbnb side. I just think that Airbnb can be very cash flow positive, and I think it's great in a lot of markets. But I think in the lower mainland, I just think it's an uphill battle you're fighting.
The only exception I can think of is if a client that bought, he's living in a 3-bedroom condo. He doesn't have kids, so you could totally Airbnb a bedroom, for example. That's a great idea. Furnish your bedroom and do a furnished bedroom rental. I guess the original intention of Airbnb was that, which you could totally still do, and you maybe not become a millionaire over it, but it'll help you cover your costs. So it's for just everyday people wanting to get by. That's still a great option. So if you're looking for yourself, even buying something with an extra bedroom, that's an option too, or an extra room, or a space that's partitioned off naturally that the floor plan lends itself well to that. Go for it.
And are these regulations the toughest in Canada now? Like, are these compared to Ontario or other provinces?
I was actually trying to find that, and I didn't realize Quebec actually is super strict on this too. I thought BC would have been the first, but apparently Quebec. But I just reading this an hour ago because I saw that question. So Quebec put something in a month ago, and it's apparently. But BC's the only government that's calling it a 90-day term. Like everybody else across Canada, across the board, I think even the US, it's a 28 to 30-day policy. That's the definition of short term, where BC for some reason defines it as 90 days. So I don't know, there might be some pushback on that. Maybe the length of what they define as short term, but Quebec does have a few restrictions. It seemed like similar registry that needs to be done provincially, and apparently $100,000 of fees up to 100,000, which is pretty aggressive. I thought 3,000 was a lot, but apparently 100 grand is par for the course. So that's the only one I found when I was doing. I just spent 5 minutes looking into it, but the other provinces I didn't see too much. Everything else is by city. It's not really a provincially mandated type of situation, right?
I think you're right there. I don't have anything to add.
It seems like Airbnb might just be a topic that's propagated as the issue for high prices that people can blame, just like formerly it was immigration. So ultimately, nice place to live, shortage of nice properties. It's going to continue to be an issue. What are do you guys know the deadlines? When does this all come into effect?
May 1st? Yeah, I think May
of next year. Okay. So I guess people that have Airbnbs, they just should make sure that they don't fit the regulations. They have to convert them before May.
Correct. Yeah. For new bookings after May.
Okay. What data did the government use to kind of these decisions? If you guys know, like complaints, or is this just like a political ploy?
I actually don't know. I couldn't find anything on that. So I don't really know what data they used on it. I'm sure they looked at something, but it wasn't really elaborated on. I think they just went off basically how many Airbnb listings there are, and if X% convert to long term, we have this many more rentals, and that's great. So let's do it.
There's been political pressure from like pushing municipalities, specifically again in the city of Vancouver. There's been a lot of push against the municipalities, and my suspicion is that municipalities have been reaching out and conversing with the provincial government, say, hey, listen, like we need more help with this, because I don't think the municipalities have the manpower and the budget to actually enforce a lot of this. So it seems like the BC government's just kind of that framework.
What resources or organizations should people turn to if they want to know sort of how things are going to be changing ahead, other than guys on social media?
Just the government website, just making sure, just reading through the fine print to fully understand, just to understand the policy throughout. I don't know if there's a ton of resources out there. I'd say just government websites, probably just get from the source would be the best.
The BC government's websites, I think, is pretty cut and dry, like a pretty explanatory of how the regulations are. And you still need to overlay that with maybe calling your municipality or looking it up on your municipal government website to see if they have additional regulations on top of the BC government. Like I said, the municipal government ultimately supersedes the BC government on these regulations.
And then how does working with real estate professionals like you help folks navigate changes like this?
Yeah, working with like that area definitely helps. And if not, the realtor doesn't know, ideally they have a property manager they work with that they can give a call to understand the nuances. Because again, this is a lot of tenancy stuff, which we have a general knowledge on, but to get into the nitty gritty, property manager is probably end of the day, the person that will be able to dictate a bit more the nuts and bolts of it. So I think having a good property manager or having us refer a good property manager is just as important as well.
Yeah, like it's just having like the contacts in the sphere because everyone's situation is so different, and obviously trying to navigate all the regulations in the housing market, whether it's the Residential Tenancy Act or the Airbnb regulations, troubled tenants, all these things, and empty homes taxes and speculation taxes. You have to, can't have units empty anymore either. So I guess just knowing all these regulations for the average person is going to be a lot to handle. So I think we're a pretty good reference point. And then if your situation's more complicated, we just have, having the contacts that we can connect you with the right people to get proper advice.
Well, it sounds like maybe the real estate gravy train's come to an end, but do you anticipate any further changes or amendments to these regulations or other regulations that might impact investors or property purchasers in the next year and a half?
I wonder if they're going to have a federal version of this coming out at some point. I don't know. It's because BC seems to be on the forefront of a lot of these policies, and I think maybe Canada might follow suit on the federal level. I forgot what I was going to say else, but I was going to mention something else, but lost it.
I think you brought up a good point. I know the federal government touched on it, BC Governments Act, and obviously polling numbers and an election that's not too far away. I think they're trying to make a splash. So I wouldn't be surprised if something leaks out of the federal government side coming months.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your time. Any final words for my followers?
No, just careful if you're doing Airbnb and just don't do it and then problem solve.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are scrambling right now in the market on the landlord side to get around regulations and figuring out how to deal with rising interest rates and evicting tenants to up rents and stuff like that. So I think I would just urge people to reach out and get advice, whether it's from a realtor or a lawyer or an accountant. There's so many people that you can go to, but I think it's just time to be sort of diligent because the governments at all levels are really trying to track down on investors, which I think are certainly being used somewhat as a bit of a scapegoat.
And I'd say also if you're not happy with the policy, maybe even giving the feedback to your local MLA. I feel like there might be a chance, and there's a chance they might lower that 90-day to a 30-day. I think that would feel the most sense if it was just in line 30 days across the board, and then that just made municipal levels. So maybe giving your feedback to your local MLA because there's a chance they could amend it, but who knows?
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. The topic that I'm not an expert in, so I make sure to bring the experts in, and I encourage everyone else to do the same depending on your unique situation. So, Steve, thanks for joining, and see you guys soon.
Thanks, guys.